Monday Night Raw has been an overall bad show for years now. This is not some kind of new development where all of a sudden in 2018 something changed and Raw became an unwatchable dreck of 3 hours. It has been a very tough show to watch for a long time now. And going to 3 hours permanently when they did in 2012 only made things, it kind of sped the process up. However, it got to a point this year, more so in the last just few months, where the show is as bad as it's ever been. It's one thing for the show to be bad. The show's been on the air almost 26 years. You're going to have years where the show is good. You're going to have years where the show is bad. But this is as bad as I could ever remember the show being. At least back in 95, I keep talking about how awful things were for a time there in 95. All those horrible gimmicks that Vince came up with, all those horrible characters, the dentist and the garbage man and Aldo Montoya with a jockstrap on his face. We didn't get to see a lot of those guys on Monday Night Raw. They did appear sometimes, but I feel like a lot of those guys were really reserved for the syndicated shows. So even back then with those horrible gimmicks, Raw, I would wager, probably wasn't as bad as it could have been. But just overall, you could have all those guys on Raw back in 1995. Raw was an hour-long show. With commercials, it was probably 48 minutes. I'll take 48 minutes of horse shit over 3 hours of horse shit. Any day of the week. Give me Isaac Yankem and Freddie Joe Floyd. With a crush squash and the fucking body Donnas. Give me 48 minutes of that. I'll live. Now imagine multiplying that by 3 hours. It's one thing to have a longer show if the show is good, if the show is better. When the show is progressively worse, but it's as long as it's ever been. It's no wonder you have so many people complaining about the show. This year alone contained multiple contenders for worst individual Raw episode of all time, including that November 26th show. It was so bad I did a whole Sound Off extra that night. I couldn't wait until the weekend because it just set me over the edge. I just watched this show thinking to myself, every segment seemed to be worse than the one that preceded it. Somebody had to actively sit there and put that show together and think that this show is good enough to air and put on television. This is a show that we can be proud of. They actually thought that. And that's what made me more angry than anything else. Was their judgment in thinking that that show was good enough to basically lay out in the way that they did, where you go from one segment to the other and it just gets worse. And never before. Now at a time when Raw is just hemorrhaging viewers, and it finally broke me this year, never before have they had their own talent, one of their top stars, go on their show to talk about how much the show sucks. And then have the entire McMahon family paraded out on television the following week to apologize to their audience. Never before has that happened. So I don't want to hear from the people who say that people like you are just exaggerating. Raw is really not as bad as people like you make it out to be. Find me another year. Find me another year where their own talent goes on the show and says the show sucks. And the owners of the company blow up their creative plans and stand in the middle of the ring 7 days later to apologize. Find me another year in the last 26 years of this show where that's happened, and I'll apologize to you, and I will admit that I was wrong and you were right. You can't, because there is no other example of this happening. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear from anybody who says the show really isn't as bad as people make it out to be. Yes, it is. And what people need to stop doing is making excuses for this show going into 2019. No more. No more excuses. They've got a live show on January 7th. Forget the Christmas Eve show. Forget the show this Monday. New Year's Eve, already taped. Forget it. Junk it. Throw it in the garbage. January 7th. They're back on television, live. First live Raw of the new year. No more excuses. There needs to be a noticeable change. There has to be an honest attempt to get back some of the viewers that they've lost. But you know what? It's not just about bringing back some of the viewers they've lost. What about me? What about Raven? How about showing respect to the viewers who still watch this show? Respect the viewers that you still have, who want the show to be better. That should be their goal. That should be their mission with this show, their New Year's resolution going into 2019.